Hello and welcome to welcome to seemingly a 1996 episode of Top Gear. We've gone back in time rather than forward. In reality, it is 2023, so Happy New Year. This absolute gem of automotive engineering behind me is actually one of my cars. It's a 96 Honda Legend, which is in here because for the first time, I think in the entire time I've owned it, something's gone wrong and the screen wash pump isn't working. So we're just trying to get to the bottom of that and sort that out. But for anyone who's never driven one of these, for long distance luxury cruising, there's almost no better car. Anyway, enough of the Honda Legend. We're only sort of 2.5 days into the year, so not masses of progress to report, but nonetheless quite a lot going on. We're going to start with the E-Type. So chrome fit-up has been the sort of main order of the day of this. Adam's been doing some general assembly work, but mainly we're moving forward to sending off a batch of chrome work. Now the guys, when they did the body work, they did quite a lot of fit-up or trial fit-up of the main bits that touch the body and the bumpers, and they did some reshaping of the bumpers to get the contours of those to match the body. But now it's painted, we wanted to do one more check. So we did another full fit-up of the bumpers. We've been through and identified all of the chrome parts that needs to go away. One of the reasons that sort of triggered this is that we want to carry on with the door build-up, and we need the door frames chrome for that, and then that kind of became a domino effect of gathering together everything for chrome. It's a bit of a mixture, mainly original stuff. There's a few new parts. You do tend to find the reproduction stuff isn't as good. So we're only using reproduction stuff where there's essentially no choice. And in most of the cases there, we're also sending those bits off to be re-chromed anyway. A, because the quality of the chrome on the repro parts isn't great, and B, just to make sure the exact quality of finish is the same throughout. So all of that lot's going to Derby Plating. Derby Plating always do our chrome work. Absolutely spot on work every time. So that lot should be going over to them, I would imagine, possibly tomorrow. And the other thing I've just been putting thought into only at the minute is the heating and aircon system on this. We've sort of got this problem brewing as well on the other E-Type we're working on. This conundrum over creating a decent heat and aircon system for them. Now the other one's a bit more of a blank canvas because we're at the metalwork stage. We can fettle things around metalwork wise to engineer the shell to fit around a much more sophisticated system. This one, because it's a very standard car by and large, we're working with a standard shell that's already been painted. So I'm trying to get my head around a way of upgrading that system that doesn't involve hacking the shell around, which may potentially mean we could market that as an aftermarket system anyway. There are various ones that are available, but none of them that I've seen seem particularly acceptable. So what I'm trying to do is come up with a way of adding an air conditioning evaporator into the system, but with a separately directable airflow through it, so that the air isn't blowing through the heater matrix and the aircon evaporator, and you can actually have a servo-controlled flapper to direct how much air is going through the evaporator, how much is going through the heater matrix to control your temperature, and then have electronic control of the other air direction as well, so the demist vents. There's already kind of a foot vent in the original, so we could add electronic control of that being open and shut, and then potentially add some dash vents as well. So watch the space on that, but I'm in the planning stage on that one. The Manta, not great progress. We actually went through the parts shelf for this the other day. Just you get to a certain point in a project where there's quite a lot of redundant stuff that's no longer needed, and it's quite nice just to go through the entire parts organisation shelf, putting all of the bits you're not going to need to one side, and then using the process of organising the parts you do still need to trigger thoughts about remaining jobs on the car and bulk out the job lists for that car. So we've just been doing that on this, and I'm still waiting for the other half of the rest of the titanium bolts for the wheels, which is just, it's like a broken record every week. I'm like waiting for the bits for the wheels, waiting for the bits for the wheels. So we're still waiting for some bits for the wheels to finish the wheel build up on this. Behind Jamie over here, which would create the ultimate awkward manoeuvre, the Mustang is looking very awesome. This is just waiting for a dry road for me to test drive. The only thing in the meantime that we're doing with, you can actually see there's a couple of bits of vinyl laying on the bonnet. The owner and we are toying with the idea of doing the Le Mans stripes on it. and we're thinking like a silver grey for them. Now I've done a Photoshop, still fairly tempted to do it based on the Photoshop, but we want to get the shade exactly right. And there's two 3M vinyl wrap shades that are quite close. Sterling silver was one, I think the other one's graphite grey or anthracite grey. So we've just, it was very hard to judge just from small samples. So I've actually ordered a metre of each so I could cut a length and actually lay it on so we can get a good comparison. So I'm going to take some pictures of that later today, send those over to the owner, and we can make a final call on that. But if we are doing the stripes, they'll go on, and then after that it'll be going over to Dale to do the final machine polishing, detailing, ceramic coating, but obviously I want to get the test driving out of the way first, and then that'll be ready for handover. Lurking behind it, Kaiser. James did a really good stint the last week before Christmas, and we pretty much got all the dash modification buttoned up on that. So I think we've sort of covered some of the progress on that, but as a recap on that one, it was basically going back to scratch with the layout of the dash. When the car was built, we talked about leaving the dash standard, and that was the decision that was made. With hindsight, when the car was finished, the owner said, well, actually, it would be quite nice to have a full-size nav screen in there. Some of the layout isn't great. The original wood doesn't look great now compared to the rest of the car. So let's go back to scratch with that. So we did, and basically blank canvassed that. Came up with an awesome sort of billet mount for a nav screen in the middle with the controls down the side. Remade all the dash fascia in aluminium, had that hydro dipped with a sort of burr walnut pattern on it. Introduced some decent sized vents for face air on the dash, which weren't originally there. Moved the climate control controls down onto the centre console from the main dash to give us room for the screen. And just neatened up the layout. So the switches were a bit of a jumble originally. The ignition switch is on the left of the wheel, which just feels a bit awkward to use. So we've put a new ignition switch on the right, then laid out the remaining three switches sort of symmetrically around the steering column. We've machined, they were all mismatched switches before Mercedes things, so we've machined little brass billet knobs for them all that have now been chromed, and they've got a little leather inlay in that's laser etched with what that switch does to tie in with the look of things like the quarter light winder knobs and other details on the interior. So it just kind of brings it all together now. And the remaining, the warning lights for the brakes and cruise control were separate lights originally. Now we've integrated those into the little gear selector display. The display that tells you what gear you're in. It's an auto, so it's like PR, N, D, and then it has 3, 2, 1. Now the gear holds on that are unlikely to ever be used, so we replaced 2 and 1 with the 2 warning lights things just to tidy the dash up a bit more. So yeah, that's good. We're going to do some testing in that, and then that'll be ready to go back to the owner. See if we can. I was going to use the word smooch again. I've done that before, haven't I? Let's smooch around this way. Camaro, John's just carrying on with some of the plumbing on that. Basically working on the oil plumbing for the power brake and power steering circuit, and I think we're just turning our attention to the aircon on that as well, but we haven't had an opportunity to do too much on that at the minute. NSU, we actually got this rolling before Christmas, I think, but I don't think it was shown in the last video. So with it not fully built up mechanically, it's a bit like it's on stilts at the minute. But yeah, nonetheless, awesome to see this rolling. We've got the screens in, we're going to get the sunroof in, and that basically is the last step for us, and then the owner's going to take it back at that point and carry it and basically finish the build himself. So it's nice to see us at this point. It's unusual around here to see something rolling on quite such narrow tyres. Land Cruiser, James has been on with offering up the prop shafts, which came back just before Christmas. He wanted to get those on before we finished the exhaust. There was a little bit of an oversight on the props where they go onto the axle end, I think it is. We'd done the drawing for the flange, but neglected to tell the prop shaft people that the nut on the axle that holds the sort of flange onto the axle actually sticks out proud, so they didn't do a counterbore in the middle for that, which was a bit of an oversight on our part. So we've just got to remachine some details on those flanges, and then those prop shafts will be ready to go on. James can then carry on with the exhaust. He's been doing something else. Yes, of course, on the subject of machining, precision machining, we had, I think we already saw the cam covers for that. In fact, that was something else that happened before Christmas, but the top face panel of the cam covers for the Land Cruiser, which have our logo kind of machined into them. We had them back a while ago, I think we've seen those already, black anodised, but we wanted to machine the lettering back through, and James has been basically plucking up the courage to do that, because it's a bit of a high jeopardy job if it goes wrong. But yeah, he did a few trials. We tried different speeds on the mill and on some samples until we were happy with the exact sort of machining patterns we were getting. And then yeah, bit the bullet, and yeah, they look absolutely fantastic. But that links me on to, before Christmas, the final components, the biggest and most expensive part of the revised cam and cam belt covers that we've done for that, came back from Alitech. So we did the old gather round, trial fit it and stand back and ooh and ah at our work, which thankfully I think George was crapping himself, because it was one of the projects he did fairly early on when he started here, and a very expensive machining job, and obviously he was very nervous that it was going to fit correctly. It's basically the section that goes onto the head that covers the cam and actually seals the oil in. The coil packs fit into that, and then the part that has our logo on covers over the top of that and essentially just hides away the coil pack wiring and makes it look pretty. But it's the bit underneath that that's got all the precision details. It has the windage, the baffle plates on the back to stop oil coming out the breathers. It's got the groove in it for the original seal that seals onto the heads. It's got seals around the coil pack, so there's quite a lot to get right, but thankfully it's looking very good, so can't wait to see that come together. It's just the inlet manifold left on that. Morris, you can see it's on the turntables. Bobby's been setting up the alignment on that. And then frustratingly, I'm still waiting for the one part I think I mentioned before on the doors. We're waiting for a metal 3D printed part. One of them was okay, there was a fault with the other one. It's the part that the exterior door handle operates in. So we're waiting for that to come back, or the replacement one to come from the manufacturer, before we can finish the door builds on this. And that's because it's a domino effect basically. You've got to get that in first, get the door handles in, and then you can get all the glass and regulators and frames in, and we can get that lot buttoned up. George has finished off his design for the little intakes that are going to sit here. So there's a 3D printed piece, and the final part will be a nylon 3D print that fills in that crescent between the spotlight and the edge of the grill aperture. And that is basically a brake cooling duct then. It just has a little spigot on the back to feed cold air to the front brake calipers. So yeah, basically edging towards completion on this, and Dean dropped the door cards off before Christmas. He's just got the rear bulkhead panel to do, and that then buttons up the interior. And Stratos, a couple of things on that actually. We got a variety of 3D printed parts through that we were having printed elsewhere at a higher resolution in a nylon material. So the rear lights, the revised rear lights, the final version of these flank vents, because these are just 3D prints that we've done as a prototype. And then having the rear light parts has allowed me to then carry on building those up. So fitting all the little LEDs into the back of, because it's kind of like an afterburner style design. It has some red LEDs that just glow slightly through the grooves in the afterburner sort of shape. So the back panel has all those little holes. Got to fit all the LEDs in those, wire all those in, and then pop them, as they say, with like an epoxy liquid that you pour in, and it just sets over the top to stop any of the connections to those being able to come loose. And then I've done one of those already, I've just got to do the other one. And then we'll be able to get those on with the revised light unit that sits in the middle. And that'll be the rear lights complete, those flank vents complete. I think George was just scanning the front clam today to do the version of the badge. You saw before the badge that we're putting on the back. We're doing a different version of that for the flanks that I think is going to be slightly smaller and have a curved reverse face on it, so it matches up with the curve on the flanks there. So he's just doing a bit of a 3D scan for that today. And then we're going to get all three of those badges machined. I think actually at that point that's more or less the exterior work done. Oh, and the front louver panel, it's not here yet, but KS Composites have finished making that. They've made the tooling and the actual final part from our drawings, so we'll show that as soon as it arrives, which I think will be probably next week now. And then that will be painted silver to match the rear louver panel, and yeah, that'll be the exterior work all done on that, and we'll be into final road testing. On that note, from having not much to talk about, that was actually a surprisingly long first half. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat and see what he can do in the metal workshop, and I'll see you next week.
Well, hello and welcome to Retropower Uncut, episode 119 from the fabrication side. And Happy New Year to everybody. And we're going to start with the Escorts, as usual. It won't be, you never know, it won't be too much longer now that we're starting with this sat on this jig. There'll be something new sat on this jig in the not too distant future. But for now, we're going to start here. This week, pardon me. This week, Sam has been working on the roll cage. He just started bending that up just before we broke up for Christmas. He's finished doing that. It's quite a lot of tweaking, getting the angles of everything exactly correct. Obviously, this is all stating the obvious really, but to get the exact gaps the same and symmetrical between the points on the car, the top corners, that tight point there and at the bottom, bearing in mind that the cars aren't 100% accurate to start with, so those angles aren't exactly the same one side of the car to the other. And also making sure that it's all visually correct, that the rear tubes follow the pillars, that the front tube, it looks parallel to the front and rear screen apertures. An interesting point we've noticed is the roof pressing is actually very slightly asymmetric on this car. Whether they all are, I don't know. It's not quite so much on that one, but that one's had a replacement roof. The tube is dead square to the front and rear screen apertures, but is actually slightly asymmetric to the roof. But anyway, so be it. That won't be noticeable once there's a headlining in there, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And it's certainly correct to the rest of the body shell, and it looks really nice. He's done a really nice job of that. Beautiful welds, everything's TIG welded in, so he's got that in. And then he's moved on to these, I would call it the sort of rear seat bulkhead. If it had a seat, it hasn't got a seat, so they're not a seat bulkhead, but this rear bulkhead section where we're going to put a bit of sort of stowage behind there on the finished car, and this will be the sort of dividing line across the car between the stowage space and the floor space where the seats will be. And we'll actually have a trim strip across the top of this when it's finished. I previously made up a press tool for these pieces and cut the blanks, so he's got the press tool out, got it set up in the fly press, pressed those, got them all finished off and trimmed up and fitted, and combination of MIG and TIG welds, and got all those in place. So that's all done. Finished off the last little bits on the outer ends of the rear bulkhead, and that's pretty much all that rear end done now. So then he's moved on to getting the exhaust tunnel fabricated, putting that in, which is again is a straight copy of the other car. And now he's moved on to doing the seat mounts, getting the seat boxes, which are a slightly modified original fitment type Escort seat box, but in a slightly moved location. They're moved rearwards by about 70 mil-ish compared to a standard Escort. But it means that they still can tie in structurally into the transmission crossmember. I think we mentioned that before. And then he'll be fabricating the rear seat mounts, which are a tubular mount, braced to plates on the tunnel and on the inner sill, and on that side onto the exhaust tunnel and onto the inner sill. So that's the next step there. Tom's also been working on this. Tom's been doing a couple of bits of finishing off on the dash, and he's also been working on the doors. On the dash, we have had a couple of tweaks to do actually. I had actually made a slight error, if I'm honest, in the positioning of the instruments, and we've actually had to move them down slightly. So we've just done another bezel, which is a very quick job to do, and we're just altering that cutout and moving that down. That was tied into the vents for the dashboard. I've just literally just cut the holes for the dash vents. We've actually revised the dash vents that we're using away from the original plan to a new plan, and as part of that plan that also ties into moving the instrument binnacle. But the holes are now cut for that. We've got to put some little sleeves into these holes to make these a little bit smaller, to take the new dash vents are a little bit smaller than the ones we were using. These are a billet vent from Resto Mod Air. I think that's the plan anyway, as far as where we are at the moment. That's the plan. And we need a 2.5 inch hole instead of, I can't remember what size these are as standard. They look about 3 inch. These are 2.5. The holes that were going to be going in were nearly 80 millimetre for the other vents. So it's a bit of a revision, 63 mil from 80 mil. It gives us a little bit more room and gives us a bit more space to play with around the instrument binnacle. We've had a bit of a revision in how we're doing that binnacle, I may have mentioned that before, in that originally it was a fabricated part with trim over the top, with a fiberglass trim over the top. We're now actually doing that in billet. I think I touched on that before. We're actually going to do that in billet and then do a trim section in the billet over the top to blend into the dash. So all that will become clear as we go. I can't really sort of explain it very well at the moment because I haven't got it drawn up or sketched or anything. It's just in mine and Cal's respective heads as of yesterday evening. There's a little bit of designing on the fly in terms of some of the finer details on the dash. Obviously the basic principles there, but there's a couple of details where this is going to differ from Gordon's car. And in those areas, they're little bits that some of which are not yet designed. And George, as you'll have detected from quite a few of these videos, has got an ever-growing and immense list of CAD work to do. He's quite inundated with work at the moment. That's where we're at on the inside, and that's what Tom's been up to there. But most of Tom's time has been slightly further forward here. I've just put a couple of doors leant up against my toolbox just to show the backs of them. He's been finishing reskinning the doors. I'm sure Jamie's got plenty of footage. Now the purple doors here, as you can see, if I carefully put it down again without making it fall over, the purple doors are from this car. They're the original doors. They were in incredibly good condition. It was interesting, when we took the skins off them, the amount of paint on them was microscopic. It was original factory paint. I've never seen primer as thin on a car. A ridiculously thin layer of primer, and that was it. And as soon as we bent the skins, that pinged off and left us with clean silver shiny steel. Nothing else, no prep on it, obviously, no etch, no nothing. The paint just pinged straight off. And they were factory original doors, and amazingly zero rust. Obviously we can't just leave them, we can't not reskin them, because the bottom edges, there's bound to be the beginnings of some corrosion in there, and we can't just hope that they'll be okay. So we've removed the skins, reskinned them, but the actual doors are in incredible condition. Obviously on the other car they were in the opposite of that, they're in terrible condition, and they've been replaced with new doors. And we've mentioned before the fact we had to move the hinges and they weren't very good, and we had some problems with the doors. Well, further to that, we had further problems in that the door skins were not fitted to the doors very well as they came, and we've actually had to reskin the new doors. Such was the problem was that the bottom edge was wavy and not parallel to the sill. It kind of rose and fell along the length of the sill. It was very obvious, the defect, and almost impossible to correct. The solutions would have been unfolding and refolding the back of the door, which is a pretty thankless task when it's got a crisp swage line or a crisp fold line already in that. Trying to unfold it and refold it generally just results in it turning into a terrible mess. The alternative would have been to cut it off and actually add a replacement section along the bottom of the door. That then adds a load of panel beating and distortion and problems to, there's a lot of hours of work in correcting the bottom of that door after welding then. So we didn't really want to do that, so the option was to fit the door skins. As I mentioned before, we were struggling to get door skins. We've now managed to get them, so they're all done. There's two more doors over there, these two here, so that's all good. Moving on from that, we come on to what Scott's been on, which is neatly encapsulated. I'll let Jamie get a bit of room. Neatly encapsulated on the front here, the strut brace, which is a straightforward, exactly the same as the other car job. So he's made a second one of those. We cut this ring here, this cone here, and these two flanges, and the same that side. They were all already cut on CNC plasma. We'd already got the tube, the oval tube. He's machined up the ends, set everything up, TIG welded everything together. Beautiful job again. Got all that done. Everything's finished, and then that's all bolted in place. Keep the inner wings where they need to be, and he's then set two on the front. Some of these parts we'd already cut the blanks when we did the last car. Some of these parts we hadn't already cut the blanks, and he's just getting all the pieces loosely assembled and roughly in place on the front so that we can build the new front inner panel. Neither of the cars are now using any part of the original front inner panel. We've thrown the whole lot away and redone it all. There's so many changes been done to it, there's just no point using any of the original front inner panel. So we've got rid of the lot, and he's just starting to piece that all together now to get everything in the place where it needs to be, and getting it all. So that's what Scott's been doing. Moving on from that, we'll go over and see what Stu's been up to. Stu has been working on the inside of the front end of the Jaguar and the top of its nose. We've discovered, we found this previously with Project Utah actually, that this nose panel was quite badly out of shape, and there was an enormous amount of lead put into this area in these cars originally, a huge amount of lead. And whilst we can put plenty of lead in again, it was so far from the correct shape, we decided to cut it out and just remake that piece. So Stu's remade that bit, got it back in, and it's a lot nearer to being the shape it needs to be. He's then done some finishing off work on the inner structures each side here, which we talked about changing and replacing. He's finished those bits off. And then he's been putting the mountings in for the horns at both sides, under here, some mounts in for the horns, and getting the planning where the wiring's got to go to those, and getting that, getting the allowances put in for that, and sort of working out where things are going to run and putting the necessary mountings in. And then he's working on finishing off the top and bottom of this set, where this infill panel comes in here. He's working out the top and bottom transition sections, which are quite fiddly shaped pieces. Of course, it's a bit that Stu's doing, so it's always going to be fiddly shaped because that's everything on this car. But he's working on the sections at the top and bottom of the inside of here, which you can just see he's got magneted and clamped in. There's a little transition piece in here that transitions between the underside, the piece above the radiator, if you like, above the grille, that's the underside of the nose, and the side panels that screw in to finish off this, the pieces we've made screw in. Again, we mentioned that before, they were originally welded in. We've decided to make them bolt in so that we've got accessibility for paint and corrosion protection, because, as I say, originally there was a real dirt trap in there and really made that area quite rot prone. So we've made those sections bolt in. So we've done, so Sue's currently doing the transitions in and out of those areas, and basically getting all of this front end ready so that you can fit the complete front end outer section, which we've shown that, haven't we? The actual completed, with it all welded into one piece. Yeah, I couldn't remember whether we've shown that before, but Stu's got all that the whole lower valance section, if you like, that's all welded up in one piece now. But he's got to finalise all the sections of this real nitty gritty. As you can see, lots and lots of little pieces that go inside that all have to line up with it and spot weld to it. Obviously that's all going to be done before that section gets fitted. But he's getting through that now, making good progress on it, and it's coming together reasonably well. Did we cover? I'm sidestepping again, but did we cover the grille last week as well? You've brazed the new studs onto the grille. The grille, we are modifying the grille, but we're using the brass outside. I'll hop round and get it because then I can explain it a bit better. In fact, I'll bring one of those as well. Tips to stuff off everywhere. Two things there. That's one of the side pieces that goes in there, which clads those. Oh, sticking on the magnet. That's one of the bits that clads the sides in the new screw-in sections. Again, as you can see, quite an awkwardly shaped piece. It sort of looks a bit like somebody's run a bit of metal over, only obviously it's got to be reasonably accurate. It has to be straight down the back, curved at the front. It's really quite awkward to make pieces like that. Much harder than, a big, nicely curved wing or something is relatively forgiving to make, because you've got a lot of space to work with, you've got a lot of shape to work with. It's quite easy. When you're just trying to do a piece that is a bit of an awkward transition from a bit of a curve to a straight, it's actually really quite tricky to do. So yeah, there's a pair of those there, and then the grille, which is a Mark II, just a damaged Mark II Jaguar grille, basically, not particularly exciting, but we're going to be modifying this. The slats will be going, and this will be being changed quite a bit, but as part of that, Stu's, this was all damaged. The studs had all been sheared off on it. They'd all got corroded and sheared off, so Stu's brazed the studs back on so that he can mount that up and use that as a guide for the shape that this all needed to be. That's just sort of an explanation really, because that's how he's evaluated the shape that the top section needs to be from the actual original, it's not the original to this car, but an original grille surround. So he's got to put the studs back onto that to be able to fit it to the car to get the shape for that lot. So he'd done a bit of repair work on that prior to doing that. I think you have to pardon me, I've still got, in the last video I mentioned I had a bit of a cold. Well, I've still got it, it just will not go away. It's just one of these ones that drags on, so Yeah, that's pretty much where Stu's at on Project Church. I think I've got everything there, haven't I? Yeah. That's where Stu's at on that. And then Bobby is still charging along with Project 1 Escort. Probably the first step. I'm bound to have forgotten things on this because I haven't really been on top of keeping an eye on this. He's finished off the work he was doing in terms of the damper reservoir mounts on the front. So he's finished welding the top cap mounts into the inner wings, which will take the oil seal. There's going to be a seal around the upper section of the damper canisters, the remote canisters, just down here. There'll be a seal around that to prevent dirt coming up and water going down. And then there'll be a little billet cap that screws on to retain that seal and finish the like a bezel around the damper adjusters. And then we've ordered some Stauf clamps from Stauf UK. We use quite a lot. He's bought there wasn't the exact size Stauf clamp available, so he's got some very slightly smaller. Bored them out and then face the depth of them back so that the Stauf clamps fit exactly, hold the damper reservoir at exactly the right displacement that way, and also clamp it nicely. Got that bolted onto the strut tower, and then he's been working on the routing for the damper pipes. That's actually quite tricky because you have to get the pipe exactly correct, a bit like brake flexes on steering wheels. You have to get the length and the mounting exactly correct so the flexi line has enough slack in it for the full suspension travel, but it also has the positioning done correctly so that through the full steering lock and the full suspension travel, no rubs are caused against anything for that pipe. The length, you're not talking very many millimeters of difference in the length between a length that works and a length that doesn't. It'll either go too tight and pull the pipe, which is very dangerous, or there can be too much slack and it will cause an excess loop in the pipe, which will then cause it to rub on a wheel, on lock, or rub against a moving piece of suspension, or rub against the body shell, all of which are no good. You cannot have rubs on these things. So ignore the fact this is all looped down here. These are over-length pipes at the moment. These are just a standard meter-length pipe that through one reason or another, these had over-length pipes with them. These are going back to have the correct length pipes fitted, but we're working out that length before they go back to have that done. So Bobby's been on with that, and also putting the mounting holes in so that we can put riv nuts in to the strut tower. There'll be some Stauf clamps fitted down there to hold this pipe down the damper tower correctly. As I say, he's worked out the lengths on that and got all that spot on. That's really good. He's also been doing the same. I think he's been doing the same for the brake lines. I'm not quite sure. So they're there. And I'm just trying to think what he's actually now on with the next stage of work that we hadn't actually covered on the HVAC unit. In fact, I'll get another prop and I can explain. There is a fan on the unit that's in the car, which is our mock-up unit. We have various blow moulded casings that Vintage Air supply to use as mock-up units, which are very good for rough and ready work and very good on a big car where there's lots of room. Most of our cars, as you'll have noticed, aren't big and don't have lots of room. So what we tend to do is do a bit of a rough idea with one of the blow moulded ones, but actually to do the final, we kind of need a fully built unit because the clearances are very slightly different around certain components. So we've actually got a full built unit that we've been using for a mock-up for several years in this car at the moment. That's got the fan unit fitted to it. The fan unit's the same as this. We tend to modify these units in the way they work depending on the application, and on this one we need to fit an air intake cone to one side of this unit. So Bobby's just about to strip, this is the actual fan that will be going in this car, and he's about to strip this down so that we can put some threaded inserts into here, or actually put basically some studs out through the side of this casing so we can fit an air intake bezel, I'm trying to think of the word really, basically a 4-inch lip to the intake of this unit so that we can put some 4-inch ducting onto it, which is a very short piece of 4-inch ducting that will go from one side of this fan unit up to a similar ring which is fitted to the bulkhead closure plate that I've showed in a previous episode that also carries the HVAC unit. There's a very short piece of this 4-inch high temperature flexible ducting. Not that it sees high temperature there, but there's a very short piece of this acting as an elbow between the two. We contemplated doing a 3D printed elbow between the two, but actually decided we were better with the flexible stuff. It's probably slightly fiddlier to fit, but it does mean that it's possible to remove the HVAC unit or the plate without having to strip the entire lot out from under the dash. You can remove one or the other without having to take both out at the same time, which you would if you had a solid unit in there. And it also just means that there can be a little bit of movement in everything without any creaking or problems like that. And also no vibration transfer. If the fan, there's bound to be a very slight bit of vibration from the fan, and it means that's not then solidly attached to the metal of the bulkhead via a plastic elbow. So having that flexible duct there has a number of advantages. It just doesn't look quite as smart, but then it is up under the dash, and it's only a piece about, well, it basically just does a 90-degree turn straight off there. So it's relatively neat, and it has several advantages. So that's why we've decided to do it that way. And I'm bound to have missed something here, but I can't remember what. I think is that about what we've got on there? I'm being very professional here, but I've lost track slightly of where Bobby was at. I know he's also been doing some work with wheel alignment next door, which I think they will have. I think Cal will have touched on next door. So he's only done a couple of days in here this week. So moving on from that, we'll notice that the prep area is amazingly empty. At the back of the body prep area, there is a set of panel stands with a set of Dodge Charger panels on. And then if we go into the paint booth, and I open the door wide so we don't have any accidents on the way in, then we see the Charger, which is just in the stages of final prep for epoxy primer. We did a bit of additional polyester on this quarter panel and the rear deck panel and around the rear window, wasn't it? On the back of the roof and on the front scuttle. So there's a bit of additional polyester around there. That's now done, blocked back and sorted. So it's now on to the final anti-corrosion high build epoxy primer, which is going on, I'm guessing, tomorrow morning. And then we'll be into final fit up of various parts, and then lots of wet blocking. Underneath, then we'll be on to Raptor, won't we? Sorry, I'm skipping ahead of myself. I ought to know this by now. Yeah, we'll be on to Raptor on the underside and Raptor on the inside. Let that cure. Then we'll be on to the final wet blocking of all the epoxy. But prior to that, a final build-up, final check of all the panel fits. Just that last chance sort of saloon of make sure everything fits before it's too late. And then, yeah, wet block all the primer and final paint. So yeah, it's coming together pretty well now. Not too long now. I mean, it's a vast car, so not too long does involve quite a lot of hours of sanding at every stage. But yeah, it's getting pretty close now, and it's starting to look quite smart. So I think on that note, that pretty much rounds up the slightly short first week back.